Mr. Kester. Well, good morning, brethren.
Good morning.
I would echo Mr. Kester's sentiments in saying that it certainly is a pleasure to be here this week, as it is always every week. So I'm going to begin with a prop here. And you think that I came to work on the Sabbath, which is not the case. So I have a toolbox here. This toolbox was a gift that Jackson received on his 10th birthday. Papa Lambert. Papa never does anything small, so quite a large toolbox for a 10-year-old. But as with any toolbox, there's tools in there. So I'm going to pull out a couple of tools here. And rule number one that he said is you always have to put your safety glasses on before you work with tools. So I'll just pull a couple things out here. We'll pull something else out. So you have many different tools. And we know that tools, the purpose of tools are to help us do something. Help us do a job and make that job just a little bit easier. So, obviously the hammer, good for many things. Hammering nails, fixing copy machines, things like that. When fixing cars, hammer does a lot of different things. You have your pliers. Mason's favorite thing with pliers is fishing, pulling the hooks out of a fish's mouth. Although pliers can be used for many other things as well. So tools, like I said, they're designed for many different things. Depending on what tool you use, determines how easy that job's going to be. Ever have that picture that you're trying to figure out if it's going to fit on the wall? And you don't have one of these. You don't have a tape measure. Well, what do? Well, you go to the picture and you put your hands like this, right? And then when you get to the wall, your hands do this. And you figure out, well, why is it not centered on the wall? Well, you don't have the right tool. You have that tiny screw that needs to be fixed on something. Well, you don't have a screwdriver. Well, what do you use? Well, a butter knife will work. A dime will work. Maybe a pocket knife. Well, all those things will work, but it just isn't the same. You don't have the proper tools. See, proper tools allows us to get the job done a little bit quicker. It allows us to get the job done with better quality. And it's just a lot more efficient. So the question is, does God have a toolbox? Does God have a toolbox? The second question is, are we part of God's toolbox? Are we part of God's toolbox, and therefore are we one of God's tools? See, without the proper tool, even the simplest of tasks becomes much more difficult. God is working on His grand plan. God is working on His perfect plan to bring all of His sons and daughters to glory. So again, the question becomes, does God use tools in order to accomplish His ultimate plan of bringing each and every one of us into His kingdom? Does He use us for that purpose? Does He use tools for that purpose? Absolutely, He does. See, God uses each and every one of us as one of His tools. He uses us each differently because He's blessed us each in a little bit different ways. We've all been blessed with certain skills. We've all been blessed with certain abilities. One of my skills and abilities is not using most of the things in that toolbox. So I don't know who's going to teach Jackson to use the tools, but I'm not sure I'm the best one. I see two in the front that I know are great with tools, so maybe we'll be calling upon you two at some time to teach them how to build things. But we each have different skills and different abilities. Those skills and abilities, they differ person to person, but God knows our strengths. He also knows our weaknesses, and He's going to use us as He sees fit. He's going to use us with our strengths versus our weaknesses, although we may use our weaknesses to teach us a lesson. One of the tools that God uses that we all must consider is the tool of Peacemaker. It's the tool of Peacemaker. In Hebrews 2:10, you don't need to necessarily turn there, I'm just going to reference it, but in Hebrews 2:10, this is where God tells us that one of His goals is to bring all of His sons to glory. In order for us to be brought to glory, we first need to be called God's sons. So the question becomes, what do we need to do in order to be called one of God's sons? Obviously, that is a huge topic. And although Mr. Close and I joked that I'd be given the sermon this morning. I am not going to. That is many, many sermons of information determining what we need to do to be God's sons. But I'm going to focus on just one thing as we move along. We need to allow God to use us as one of His tools. That's kind of point one. We need to allow God to use us as one of His tools. See, we can act as one of God's tools in many, many different ways. There are many tools required to build a house. God is going to use many tools to build His kingdom. So as we begin to focus just a little bit more during this sermonette, if you would turn to Matthew 5:9. Matthew 5:9. I think Mr. Rigord may have used a couple of these scriptures over the last couple of weeks in his series on the fruits of the Spirit. In Matthew 5:9 it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." So one of the requirements that we have to fulfill in order to be called the sons of God is to be a peacemaker. The tool that God needs all of us to be is that peacemaker. Look around, it's pretty obvious. We need peace. So one of the things, as I said, we need to do in order to be called one of God's sons is to be that peacemaker. Now I know I look forward to the time when I am brought to glory and made one of God's sons in His kingdom, just as each of you are. Therefore, one of the things that I know I need to work on is my ability to become a peacemaker. They say that practice makes perfect. Although we know that none of us will ever quite get to perfection, as that distinction is left up to God and Jesus Christ. They hold that. We never will. But our job is to try to get closer and closer to that perfection. So if we look at any positive spin on the state of affairs that we see, we have plenty of opportunity to practice being a peacemaker. There's a lot of opportunity to practice being a peacemaker. In Psalm 34:14, we read that we're to seek peace. It says, "Depart from evil and do good." Here's the key word. Seek peace and pursue it. Seek peace and pursue it. Brethren, that implies that it's not necessarily going to come to us. In this world, peace is not always going to come to us. We need to seek peace. We need to pursue peace. We need to make a conscious effort to make that happen. It can be very, very difficult to be the peacemaker. People treat us poorly. Our human nature is to return that favor. But is that in keeping with being a peacemaker? In Matthew 26, this is the account of when Jesus was being arrested. Matthew 26, beginning in verse 51. Jesus Christ gave us a lesson in making peace in this particular account. It says, "Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested Him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear." Kind of a strange example of peace. Took a sword and cut a guy's ear off. That's not peacemaking. But if we read further, we'll get to the peace part. In verse 52 it says, "Put your sword back in its place." This is what Jesus told them. "For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." In verse 53 it says, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father and have at will all 12 legions of angels at my disposal? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way?" You can imagine the scene at the time. It must have been chaotic when they were coming to seize Jesus. Somebody pulls out a sword, cuts off one of the captor's ears. Must have been chaotic. But if we look at another account, this could have been a potentially deadly situation for all of the disciples that were there. But it wasn't, because Jesus played the peacemaker. So not only did He tell them to put away their swords, but if you look at Luke 22, a little bit different account of the same event. Luke 22 verse 49, we read a little bit different take on it. So not only did He tell them to put their swords away, here's what He also did. It says, "When Jesus' followers saw that it was going to happen, they said, 'Lord, should we strike with our swords?' And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, 'No more of this. No more of this.'" And then what did He do? He took it one step farther. He touched the man's ear and healed him. These were the people that were coming to take him away, coming to arrest him. So not only did he tell his disciples not to fight, he actually healed one of the men that was trying to take him captive. So Jesus was teaching Peter and others a valuable lesson about peacemaking. See, Peter drew his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest. They were all ready to fight. They were there to protect their teacher. They were there to protect their friend. Jesus didn't allow it to happen. Jesus was acting as the peacemaker. There was a blog on one of the UCG sites, I saw it some time ago, but there was a blog about being a peacemaker. It said this, it says, in American West folklore, the Colt 45 revolver was known as the peacemaker. Mr. Marlowe, I know you know that. He's a fan of guns. The Colt 45 was known as the peacemaker. It goes on to say that gunning down anyone who disagrees with you is a violently aggressive concept of peacemaking, especially if you're the one being shot. Many people go through life as verbal gunfighters, ready to slay their opponent with the words at the slightest provocation. So I think back, how would we have handled that situation that Peter and Jesus Christ were in when they came to arrest him, when the swords were drawn? It must have been chaotic. How would we have reacted? Brethren, it's very difficult for us to hold our tongue when we're being attacked or when we feel that we're being treated poorly. However, we know that we are to seek peace. It's not coming to us. We need to seek it. We need to pursue it. So how does engaging in argumentative or violent actions help with seeking peace? Well, it doesn't. In Proverbs 13, verse 3, very clear direction about holding our tongue. Proverbs 13, verse 3. It says, he who guards his mouth preserves his life. Pretty powerful statement. He who guards his life, or he who guards his mouth preserves his life. But he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction. Think about all the opportunities in our life, brethren, when we have to hold our tongue. It's not easy. And we get to practice that a lot. It was a couple of months back, I sat in a board meeting. And I was not necessarily attacked by name at this board meeting over some procedures that the district developed over the state testing debacle that probably some of you have seen in the news. The sit and stare, and we're abusing children because we're making them to take state assessments and all of the political stuff that goes along with that. But the board set some procedures and policies in place that all the building administrators that administered tests were supposed to follow. Well, at this board meeting, they were very unhappy with the middle school. So they never mentioned me by name, but they kept saying the middle school principal. There's only one of us. So it doesn't take too much to figure out who they're talking about. I mean, just person after person just attacking the middle school principal. You can't say anything. I could have. I would have loved to. Because the other issue was that it wasn't just me, it was every other school, but obviously I have more kids that didn't take the exam than the elementary schools, so we were much better represented, so to speak, at this board meeting. But had I said something, I would have had to throw my other colleagues under the bus. I would have had to throw the superintendent under the bus. Probably would have made things worse. Would that have been keeping with being a peacemaker? So you sit there and you bite your tongue. You try not to mumble. You try not to let your face turn red. You got to be that peacemaker. It was good practice for me. I need more, but it was good practice. This week also, our superintendent is leaving, and some of you may know that we haven't always had the best relationship. Again, another opportunity for me to try to be the peacemaker. Well, we were required at this meeting to give a story about the superintendent because he was leaving. I stressed about this all week. I was always taught if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I'll be honest with you, I can't think of a nice story. It's been a very long 3 years working under this superintendent. Part of the job, I get it, but I didn't have anything nice to say. But the other thing was is if you pass, say, I don't have any stories to say, that's kind of disrespectful in an open meeting too. So I said some prayers and asked God to put some words in my mouth that would be appropriate, but not hypocritical. I didn't want to lie. I wasn't willing to do that just to make him feel better in a public setting. So I chose my words very carefully, and what I said was that the superintendent always tried to make me understand the political ramifications of decisions. Now everybody knows that this guy is all about politics. So I didn't say anything disrespectful because that's what he always tried to do. Always tried to make me understand the political ramifications of a decision. See, he doesn't like to make decisions that are good for kids, which is why I get in trouble. It's all about the politics. So hopefully those words were chosen somewhat wisely, and I didn't disrespect him because he did help me with that understanding. But again, just another situation where being the peacemaker, I had to hold my tongue. It was hard. There's a lot. I would have loved to share a lot of stories, but I couldn't do it because I had to be that peacemaker. So brethren, I'm not the only one that faces those situations. We all face that to some degree or another. And we'll continue to face that. We have a choice of whether or not we're going to engage in the behaviors that are contrary to making peace, or whether we are going to be that peacemaker. Again, this world is in desperate need of peace. We had a situation this week where we had a fight in the locker room over at the high school. I had to watch the video to determine, who was guilty and who was going to be suspended, possibly arrested by the police and charges pressed. It was a very difficult video to watch. It was clearly an attack. Clearly an attack by a high school student on my student. Although he did show some defensive postures, he never threw a punch. He was trying to protect himself. That wasn't the hardest part to watch. Every other person in that locker room, what did they have? They had their cell phones up, videotaping the fight. This kid was being pounded. He was being choked. It was a beating. Every other kid in that locker room had their phone out, videotaping it. Were they a peacemaker? One kid finally at the end stepped up, who was a senior football player, stepped up and said, "That's enough," and let the kid go. The kid took one more opportunity. As he was walking away, he called his name, turned around, and he punched him in the face again. Led to stitches in his face. But again, nobody stepped in, videotaping it. They all knew what was going to happen. Brethren, this world is in desperate need of us and others to become that peacemaker. God has many tools in his toolbox. Jackson has quite a few. Papa will keep adding to that toolbox. But God has many tools. He uses each of us as one of those tools. He needs us to help him to establish that peace. Now we know God can do anything he wants, but he does use us to help establish that peace. Brethren, there's a day coming when God will call us his sons. The glorious day that'll be. There is a day coming when God will bring us all to glory. But until that time comes, remember to seek peace. Remember to pursue it. It's not always going to come to us. Seek it and pursue it. Remember to flee from evil and do good. And ultimately, brethren, remember to be that peacemaker.